Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Schmoozing with Rabbi. Today we are joined by Shannon. Shannon has a very interesting story to share with us. Shannon started off as an evangelical Christian and is now currently living in Israel as a convert to Judaism. So Shannon, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about how you got from a evangelical Christian who was a missionary to now you're against missionaries? That's what Beinenu is, correct?
Yes.
So,
it is.
So you want to fill us in on how you got from A to B and all that's in between?
Yes. I was born into an evangelical Christian family, a typical evangelical Christian family, but maybe not like completely typical because my father was a minister. My mother was very much involved in the administration of the church. So
be a minister, that's like being a rabbi, would you say? Or how?
No, she was like the church secretary, handled the day-to-day business dealings with the church.
I mean your dad, you said he was a minister. That's like being a rabbi, or how
my father was a minister. There's a minister means they have credentials. They went to school, they learned, they studied, and they preached the gospel. He was more of an evangelist, which means that he travels and speaks at different churches, like a guest lecturer, I guess, an inspirational speaker that would go to churches. And a pastor is the term of like a pulpit rabbi. Like you can be a rabbi, but not practicing it or running a shul. But
so when you say your dad went to learn as a minister, what was that he was learning? Because like I've listened to a lot of we're going to link all of your stuff below, because I've like been binging it like the past like 3-4 days because it's just so interesting. Like I've really enjoyed it. So I'm going to leave in the comments below. But when you were saying that he was learning, how is it differing to how we would learn Gemara and Talmud and Chumash and all of these? You say it's more like learning just straight from the verses of the Bible, or how would they learn?
They call it seminary. Which is learning for leaders in the church. There's all kinds of focuses. The entire Bible, a large focus on the New Testament. Salvation, they learned the founding church fathers, and
so you say often. We're gonna allow you to continue on in a second. These are just like my burning questions that I've been dying to ask. You say that often when you'd quote verses to some people, they'd often say, okay, in the context that you're giving it, you're right, it does sound like you're quoting Jesus. But if you look at the surrounding verses, you'd understand that it wasn't. So how is it that when they were learning, they weren't coming across those verses in the same way that we would?
Right. That particular way of learning was mostly as I guess it's done by subject matter. Like when you're talking about salvation, you're given a list of verses that speak about salvation and that it's acceptance of Jesus, the salvation. And it's not necessarily read from front to back and cover. They have like daily devotionals, which would be a subject, and then a bunch of verses that support whatever subject it is you're learning. So a lot of the learning is learning individual verses to support a certain subject, not exactly
going through it from beginning to
straight reading like you would read a book. I mean, you can, and people do. I've gone through the Bible a couple of times in that way. But when it comes to relaying that information or speaking or doing sermons, you pick out verses. I often call it like a buffet. You come up with something and you pick certain things to validate or verify that.
Okay. Interesting. Fine. So let's get back into those were like the burning questions I didn't fully piece together. But let's get back into your story from birth. So you were born to you said your dad was not a missionary, sorry, I lost the word now. What did you say your dad?
An evangelical minister.
A minister, sorry.
Is what he was.
He was a minister, and your mum was like a receptionist for the church.
She was a church secretary. She ran the daily ins and outs of the church.
So what was your upbringing in that household then?
It was very religious focused because everybody was so involved with the church. When the doors were open, we were there. I participated in everything that was going on, the youth groups, they had a sort of a Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts thing. There was choir and like all kinds of activities that were always going on, Bible studies and prayer groups. And if the doors were open, we were there. That's how I can explain it.
I hear. So what like led you down the path? And once you started, like you were in the church the whole time, what, like growing up, you started to believe that your mission was to be a missionary? How did you get into that route?
Because I was so active in the church, it was sort of natural. And in evangelical Christianity, there's a big deal about finding your purpose and what God wants you to be, and allowing yourself to be used as a vessel of God for whatever he has planned for your life. And evangelical Christianity, that plan is generally to evangelize, either in a teaching capacity or one-on-one, or missions in different areas around the world, or specific missions.
So who decided as in where you would go to or who you would speak to? You did, or the church, like the people in the church were telling you where to go to and how to do it?
Well, you're taught to pray about it and ask God to lead you into whatever it is that he wants for your life. And that usually is whatever you happen to be involved with. And I began my life as a missionary very young. My training was as a teenager in high school. So I took that to
that point.
As an evangelical Christianity, everybody is trained to evangelize. You are taught in church. If you're involved in any other classes that are taught, you're basically taught the salvation plan, because that is the focus of evangelical Christianity, is to share your faith with everybody. And you're taught to integrate your belief and your lifestyle and share that with every person you come in contact with. So whether it's work or friends or social circles, you're supposed to share the gospel with everybody you come in contact with. For me, I was a kid when I started, and I was a teenager. I was in high school. I was known as the Jesus freak. I carried my Bible in school. It was called a Bible thumper. Changed it to the initials PK because I was a preacher's kid. And I was simply known as the Jesus freak, which most people would probably be offended by. They did mean it in a negative, not nice way. But to me, I wore that like a badge of honor, because that was my faith, and I was very proud of it. And I was very committed to it. I wanted to be a good Christian, and I wanted to do whatever it was that I felt was God's purpose in my life. And at that time, it was high school. So I was sharing Jesus and talking about the gospel, and it was to my peers. I started the first Christian student union in my high school, which was a Bible study that we would do after school. I'm actually very shy, so I can't I couldn't speak to a large group. So I wouldn't do like my father did, like speaking to whole congregations, but one-on-one, I was fine. And I didn't have a problem sharing Jesus with my peers and inviting friends to church, which was the way to get them to hear, more and get involved.
And were they happy to come with you and happy to listen? Like was there not like a stigma behind it, especially if you had the name, to be like seen, like speaking to you about Christianity?
I imagine that you're in the Jewish world, and you're probably familiar with B'nai Akiva.
Yeah.
If you invited somebody who knew nothing about B'nai Akiva to B'nai Akiva and told them that it was candy and games, they'd probably say, yeah, I'm in. So if you tell them that there's pizza on every Wednesday night and we play pool and we play music, and it's not so hard to get them involved. And then when they're there, then they hear the gospel, they hear the Christian message, which in that context, with the world focus, is everybody has sin. Everybody you can't have a relationship with God because of sin. He's a perfect God, and unless you have forgiveness of sin, you can't approach God and you can't have a relationship with him. And in Christianity, evangelical Christianity, the belief is that you have to accept Jesus in order to have that forgiveness of sin, which separates us from God. So that is the message, and how somebody comes to believing in Jesus is in search of a relationship with God.
So for those of us who are like naive and don't really understand it, you see, within evangelical Christianity, you see Jesus as God himself, or you see him as the fact that he's son of God makes him God? Because that was one thing that I in all, like every time I hear about it, I never fully understand, because our upbringing isn't to understand it.
To be honest, I don't know that most evangelicals can understand it. And in fact, in literature and training material for Jewish evangelism, it's avoid that topic, because it's hard to explain. When you have to do acrobats with your mind and try to make sense of things and use words that don't really make sense, like a triunion, and there's a lot of crazy terms in explaining the Trinity, but it's basically, a Father, a Son, and the Holy Spirit, but they're all one person. And they're very separate, but they believe that God was man. God took himself and became man in order to have a connection with the world. And because they need forgiveness for sin, he became the perfect sacrifice, bringing a korban. And without that korban, you can't have a relationship with God. So he sacrificed his son, which was actually himself, which blows the mind of most Jews, because that doesn't make sense. But and it doesn't. It's very difficult to understand and describe. But they do believe that it is one person and they are the same.
So when you were growing up and hearing all of this, were there ever questions, or like just that was what you grew up with, that was the truth, and you knew that was the truth, and there's no reason to question it?
When you're taught that from a very young child and you grow up with it, you don't question it, because that's your baseline.
That's your essence at that point.
Right. So there is no questioning, and everything is taught through that filter. So even when you did learn the Tanakh, when you learned, which to me was the Old Testament stories, I was taught first right away, Jesus loves you, Jesus died for you, Jesus, it was all Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And then you learn the Old Testament and the Tanakh through the lens of Jesus. Like this is what led up to Jesus, but it's all very focused around Jesus. He's the core of everything, and everything else just revolves around that belief.
At that point, you went with it, and this was what completely made sense to you.
Absolutely. I didn't question it. And then when I became more involved in ministry and becoming a missionary, I had absolutely no doubt in my mind that it was absolutely true and that it was right.
That meant that was your career at that point?
I think it would be a mistake to tell you that it was a full-time situation as if that was a profession, because there are professional missionaries, which are, paid on a salary and they work for the church. But in reality, every evangelical, fundamentalist, Christian, born again believer in Jesus is by definition a missionary.
Interesting.
They're all taught. In fact, the leaders of missionaries, professional missionaries, are often not the ones to do the evangelizing. The Jews for Jesus people that you see on the street that do this like for a living or as a large portion of their life, they're really mostly the people who train others. The leaders in the church are often not the ones to do the evangelizing, but they teach all of the members of the church and the lay people to be the evangelists and to do the missionary work. So every evangelical you come across is a missionary.
So interesting. I never understood. I guess the way we can understand it is always like, I guess, Lubavitch or Chabad, the shaliach in that case. You guys were the shaliachs almost.
Right, or anybody who does kiruv. Somebody who's really serious about kiruv, they don't have to do it as a profession, as a job. It's just something that they're passionate about, and it permeates everything they do, every relationship they have, everybody they meet. They go to a pizza shop, they're talking about it. They're like, trying to, any yid they come across, they're trying to bring in and inspire in some way. And that's very much what an evangelical is. I'm sure you've met some. Have you ever met an evangelical Christian?
So in the UK, we have Jews for Jesus, and like it's like on the corner of like the big Jewish community, and so like you will always come across them, but we just avoid them. Like you see them, they come up to you, very, very smiley, very happy to see you, but like we just never interacted. It was just I don't know why. Have you
ever met like just a friend, somebody in school on the basketball field, maybe just anywhere that you've encountered an evangelical Christian?
In the UK, the Jewish community is like reasonably secluded if you're in the right communities. So I was thinking about the other day, I don't think I ever have. I really don't think I ever have.
Wow.
Yeah. Unless maybe it's not so prominent in the UK. I'm not sure. Do you think there's, I guess I definitely should do some research after this.
I haven't made it to the UK.
Yeah.
But I imagine that is a lot of what I do is trying to, I don't want to offend Christians. I don't want to tear down Christianity. I don't want to counter the text. I try not to get into the textual arguments because I don't feel that's my place. And I don't want to hurt Christians, but I do want the Jewish people to understand that Christians are not bad people. They're coming from a loving place. In their mind, they're doing the ultimate mitzvah. This is a big chesed for them, which the Jewish people don't understand, because if you've never encountered and you've been completely secluded, when you hear about missionaries, you probably have a very negative view 100% of what that is. Mm-hmm. So if you were to have this negative view of what an evangelical Christian is, and then you actually encountered one and they're the nicest person in the world, you would be very put off. You would be like, your guard would be down and you'd say, wait, I was all wrong about these people. They're nice and they're my friend. And that is I think that is a danger of teaching that Christian people are evil and that this is a bad, terrible culture, and that they're bad people that we need to
Stop.
to stay away from or stop, or that there are enemies, because when you actually encounter one, that is not what you're going to find.
So before we go into what you're currently doing now, I just want to get to how did you get to where you are now? Because we've established your roots as a missionary. So what was this point you continued like caring your friends in school, and then where did it go from there?
As an adult, the church that I was involved with, a typical evangelical church, had morphed into a messianic congregation, which was definitely, it was every bit evangelical as every other evangelical church is. But they start to study the Hebrew roots of Christianity. They start to incorporate Jewish symbols and traditions and icons, and the language of the Jewish world. On one hand, they say it's to learn the Jewish roots of Christianity so that we could observe Christianity in the way that Jesus would have observed Christianity, and learn about the Jewish part of Jesus. But at the same time, it's also the invention of Messianic Judaism was with the purpose of basically changing the marketing of how you would share the gospel with Jewish people, because Jewish people don't want to be not Jewish. They don't want to be Christians, right? Growing up, I don't think I knew a single Jewish person. I do think that there was a couple of Jewish people that we had in the church that I remember was a big deal because they were Jewish, but I wasn't completely sure why.
From my understanding, Christians, like I'm saying, you look back at like the Rhinelands and all the things, Christians and Jews haven't always got on. Like the Christian ideology, from my understanding, is that we killed Jesus. So like we've got a very rocky past together. So how did you see the Jews? Did you see them in a negative way?
Actually, that's the very big difference between Catholicism, Greek Orthodox, the Catholic Church, and Protestant evangelical Christianity. It's called replacement theology, which is what the Catholic Church subscribes to, which is a very dark, not nice view of the Jews. And they believe that the Jewish people have been replaced, that they rejected Jesus, that they killed Jesus, that they no longer are in favor, and that Hashem has ended his covenant with the Jewish people, and that because the church accepted Jesus, that they are the new Israel, and they are the new they're the new, right? They replaced the Jewish people. Evangelical Christianity believes that the Jews are still very much, they have a covenant with God. The Jews are still very much God's chosen people. They are not in good standing with God right now because they've rejected Jesus. They believe that they are blinded, but they do have a role to play in end times. And
so they believe that Jews should stay Jews, or they believe that Jews should become Christian and believe in Jesus? Or can it be one and the same? Or can Jews stay Jews and believe in Jesus?
Can you you ask different questions, but no, Jews cannot remain Jewish. There is a marketing technique that they have come up with since then to convince you that that's possible. But no, a Jew, in order to go to heaven, in order to fulfill God's plan for the redemption, the Jews have to convert to Christianity. And it's that process that an evangelical Christian is dedicated to. It's the process of bringing Jews to Jesus is a step towards bringing about the second coming, the redemption of the world.
Okay, so going back now, we were saying that you hadn't met a Jew up until the point like of high school. You were getting into adult life as a missionary. So what changed?
As an adult, it was actually my church that changed. There was, instead of an typical evangelical church, it became a messianic church, which started to learn the Hebrew roots of Christianity, took on Jewish symbols and icons. We started learning the traditions and moving away from the pagan aspects of Christianity. We were taught that they were pagan and that we need to celebrate and observe Christianity in the way that they thought Jesus would. It also, it was invented as a marketing change to the Jewish people in order to make it more palatable to a Jew, because a Jew doesn't really want to go to church. Even the most secular, unaffiliated Jew doesn't want to become a Christian. That's seen as a negative, bad thing. But if you can change the way a church looks and feels, you change the language, you repackage it with a Jewish flavor, maybe it'll be, more appealing to a Jew. So they changed the language, they changed the way it looks. You go into a messianic church, you don't see any crosses. You see a Magen David all over. They have an Aron, they have a bima. They call people up to the Torah. Most of them have a Torah scroll that they read from. You'll see everybody wearing a talit. They have all of the symbols and icons and traditions of Jews, so that a Jewish person doesn't
feel uncomfortable there.
Doesn't go running, because it's a very Christian atmosphere.
But why is it that they feel the need is more to hit the Jews at that point? Is it to change the whole church feel and everything just to convert the Jew?
Because there's a priority on Jewish people, because although the Great Commission, that is a commandment from Jesus himself to take the gospel to the whole world, is believed by everybody. There is a special purpose for the Jewish people that only there's a role in the end times that only a Jew can fill, and that is the conversion of the Jewish people. The conversion of the Jewish people is the final step in bringing back Jesus and triggering the second coming.
Interesting. So that at that point, you were very set. Once they changed over to the Messianic Church, you decided to go more down the route of finding Jews and bring them back. Yes.
Then I think we discussed how the technique before that was to teach everybody that your sin, you can't have a relationship with God. Sin separates you from God, so you have to accept Jesus so that you have forgiveness for your sin. That was the technique in bringing anybody. But with Jews in particular, you had to learn a different way to do it. One was the language. You can't use the typical language of going to church. You can't say cross. You can't say Christian. You can't say, the New Testament. Everything has to have like a Hebrew spin to it or a Jewish flavor. So instead of cross, they'll say like a tree. Instead of the New Testament, they say Brit Chadashah. Everything is from has a little, Hebrew-ish mixture to it. It's deceptive in a way, but it's meant to keep you from running away.
At that point, you're like slightly understanding Hebrew and all the different concepts that we were talking about, so you could speak to the Jew.
I'm learning to incorporate some Jewish language and how to speak. At the same time, I became obsessed with learning the prophecies, because I was more so pulled to the Orthodox world. I was fascinated with Orthodox Jews. I watched them. I would go to kosher restaurants. A lot of the evangelical world that I was living in was more targeted towards the JCC. There was a weekly campaign of going to the JCC. They were constantly trying to take part in classes that were being taught at the JCC, or secular, reform, conservative, less affiliated Jews were easier targets. But something pulled me towards the Orthodox, and I would visit kosher restaurants and just watch them from a distance. I started, like, when Chabad was hosting an event or something, I'd sort of like show up and be walking around and sort of like, checking them out. I watched things. I was on Aish websites and OU, and was sort of learning, and was like, fascinated with a lot of Orthodox Judaism. I found it fascinating that they were so religious and that they seemed so connected and so committed to their faith. And it blew my mind that they could be so committed to God, but not know Jesus, or not.
Do you think
be
they were
Christian?
naive? Do you
I think they were naive. I did. I thought that they just didn't know better. That their rabbis forbid them from reading the New Testament, and I was taught that there was actually chapters and verses and things that you were not allowed to study, and that if you were to study those, you would find Jesus. So your rabbis would tell you not to, and that there were things that in yeshiva you weren't allowed to learn.
Who told you this? Or you just...
It is a common thing in the church.
Really?
If you Google the forbidden chapter that Jews are not allowed to read, that's a big deal.
So what chapters? Do you know?
Isaiah 53
Mhm.
is labeled the forbidden chapter. They actually say that the rabbis forbid you to read that, and that it has been taken out of your texts.
Is that the one where it's mistranslated Ari? Or
No, that is Psalms. No, actually, Isaiah 53 is referring to the nation of Israel, but they take one chapter and a certain section of that chapter that says that he would be bruised for our transgressions, and it's a chapter that sounds like Jesus, but when you actually learn it in context, you learn the servant songs leading up to Isaiah 53 from 42 or 43 all the way up to 53, and then on, that the servant that is referred to in Isaiah 53 is actually Jesus, is actually the Jewish people and not Jesus. But when you take that one portion, it does sound like Jesus, which is actually how we got to your real question, was how this happened. Isaiah 53 was one of my favorite verses, and I knew it wasn't mistranslated, but I knew that there's no way that a Jew could look at that chapter and not see Jesus, because it sounds so clear. It really sounds like Jesus, and they have to see it. And this is the forbidden chapter. I need to get a Jew to look at this. And I did get an Orthodox Jew to look at it. And I played a innocent Christian girl that was looking to find out the Hebrew, and I'm looking into mistranslations. Could you read this to me in Hebrew and tell me what it says? And I pointed out those verses, and he read it, and he was very upset and shaken. And I thought, I had him, that he sees Jesus in that, and it's disturbing him, and I'm getting through. And he wouldn't speak to me anymore about it, said, I can't go here, I can't do this, and struggled with it. And I asked if I could I ask some more about some other verses? And he says, I can't do this with you anymore. This is wrong. And I think you need to, if you're really looking into this, I'm going to recommend something. And he gave me this tape series, and it was Rabbi Tovia Singer. It was the Outreach Judaism. It was the Judaism's response to Christian missionaries, which he thought I was ready to learn the fallacy of Christianity and the Jewish responses and what was wrong with what I was trying to teach him. But I was stubborn, and that wasn't at all what I thought it was. I actually thought that I'd hit the
jackpot.
I'd hit the jackpot, that now I have the cue cards that the Orthodox Jews were using against me, because every time I came in touch with an Orthodox Jew and would try to share the gospel with them or talk to them about Jesus, they would make fun of me, and they would tell me that things were mistranslated, or that I was taking things out of context, or that it didn't exist. And they seemed to, every time I had something to present or another argument that I would come to them with, I would memorize a few more prophecies each time and come back to them, and they always had an answer. And now I had this whole series of all of the answers that they were giving me. So, and I knew that to Jewish people, their rabbi was a big deal. And if I could discredit their rabbi, if I could show that their rabbi was wrong, then I could get through to them, and they would distrust their rabbi a little bit, enough to look at the things that I felt they were forbidden to look at and weren't looking at, and would open the door. So I went about doing that and learning this rabbi's arguments. And that didn't work out so well, because actually this rabbi tore apart everything that I had ever learned and everything I knew to be absolutely true. It was really devastating. It was traumatic, and it was so because I was so committed to my faith as a Christian, that once things started to fall apart, my identity started to fall apart, because that was everything in my life.
So what was that feeling that when you actually came across that, and like, did you believe it at first? Do you think that maybe there were some things that he was wrong about, or once you heard it?
I thought for sure he was wrong. I thought for sure he was wrong about everything. And I did. I took my Bible, and I knew that he has to be wrong. There's got to be, Jesus is in here somewhere, and kept trying to make it work. And it wasn't making it work. He turned out to be right about everything. I side by side would put the different translations. I would put the Hebrew, and I would put my Christian Bible. I would, an art scroll Tanakh. It was, even the English translations would show you the difference. And even within the Christian Bible, the references that fell apart, that were taken completely out of context. When you learn them in context, they no longer had anything to do with Jesus or the Messiah.
So once you started learning all of that, what was your reaction? What did you start doing?
It was devastating. I was angry. I felt betrayed. I felt, how could this possibly be? Christianity is a complete lie. The church lied. This is some like big scam. My family lied. Jesus isn't real, because to me, Jesus was very, very real. I woke up every morning talking to him. He followed me through my whole day. I I knew that Jesus was in control of everything I did every day, and I wanted to serve, and I wanted to do whatever it was that I felt his purpose for my life was, and everything was committed to Jesus. I believed that if I prayed for something, it would come about, and that he was leading me and directing me in everything that I did. So, and that's from when I was a child. I walked around talking to this, was basically an imaginary friend, and to discover that somebody that close and real to you isn't real, and that it was an imaginary friend, that was devastating. Psychologists refer to it as a major life change, like losing a significant other, a spouse, somebody very close to you. And there was a grieving process that took place.
So what was the moment that like set in that you were like, this wasn't what I believed it to be, like, and you knew for certain it wasn't?
It didn't take long, because you don't eat, you don't sleep, you're completely absorbed in studying all of these texts and trying to make it work, and it all fell apart very quickly. It was a snowball effect that took place.
And it affected your family members at all? Did they know about it?
Not at first. It was completely alone. I was never ever going to share what was going on with anybody around me, because
Do you think they had
to
been lying to
reject
you?
Jesus is huge. That is like the big no. You can't, that's a line you can't cross. There are many scriptures in the New Testament about somebody who rejects Jesus, and they're not nice. It's really, it makes you a very bad person, and very
At that point,
it's
if you
like you're
didn't
cut
believe in it,
off.
did you still, was there still the fear of these texts though, in case it was? Or
I sort of waited, what if I'm wrong, because there is a concept in Christianity, what if you're wrong and you reject Jesus and you're going to go to hell, which, because Christianity was completely falling apart, that argument didn't stick so much. That is the argument my mother used of what if you're wrong, you're going to hell and you're taking my grandchildren with you. But at the same time, I was taught that God was loving and he cared about us. And Jewish people, I was watching the Orthodox Jews. I was slowly taking on more and more of the traditions and dressing, and I was eating kosher, and thought, if I'm dressing conservatively, I'm spending so much time obsessed and learning the text and wanting to have a relationship with God and find out the truth. Would I really be punished and go to hell when my heart is really, trying to find what's truth and really connect to God? I didn't see that as, I couldn't mesh that.
Do you feel that your connection with God changed at all during the time? Was there, like, once Christianity fell apart, was it instantly, I believe in Judaism, or was there still questions in between of like your relationship within God?
There was grieving, a lot of grieving, a lot of anger and betrayal. I think you go through every stage of the grief process. I rejected God altogether. I thought, then there's no God. I've discovered that this is all false, and very angry. And I didn't know anything else to do in those moments other than pray. And then when you're like in those moments of feeling helpless, hopeless, and very deeply grieving, and you realize that you can't pray. There's nobody to pray to. It's
Very lonely.
it's very devastating. It was a tragic, it was a crisis that I was in. I reached out to the rabbi whose lessons I was learning and had decided, okay, I've come to terms with everything I've seen and I've done, but this Jesus figure is something I have applied my whole life to. And is that all for nothing? Did I really love and commit my life to something that is a total fantasy? I somehow need to come to terms with that, and I need to know who Jesus was. So I called this rabbi and said, I understand everything is wrong and that's wrong, but please tell me who Jesus was. There was some sort of historical Jesus. There's some meaning for his existence, something. I didn't totally waste my whole life and commit to the Easter bunny. Please tell me there's some purpose. And he said that I was trying to file away my belief in a way that made sense. And the real question is Jesus the Jewish Messiah? That's the difference between Judaism and Christianity. The claim is that he's the Messiah. If he's not the Messiah, then nothing else matters. It's irrelevant. Who he was as a person, isn't any different than anybody else in history. If he even existed, the whole belief system is based on him being the Messiah, which made sense, but it didn't make me feel too much better, because I was still grappling with, then there's no God. And that was still devastating and hopeless. And I continued crying. I don't know how to function anymore. I don't know how to be. I don't know who I am. God has always been part of my life and central in everything I do. I don't know how to function without God, and to find out that there is no God and that he doesn't really exist. This is like really devastating. And this rabbi said, you're wrong. He says, you've just discovered that Jesus is not the Messiah, but God is still very much there. He's there for you. You're a child of God. He loves you. You can directly speak to him. You have a direct connection. You don't need an intercessor. There isn't a Messiah that has to die for your sins. That is all. What you've learned is wrong, but God is there, and he's listening to you. He hears your prayers, and he wants a relationship with you, and that hasn't changed, which changed my whole focus. And I said, okay, so everything I've learned was wrong, and I need to grapple with finding out, separating truth from fiction, and what is it that I know is wrong, and what is truth. And I began learning Torah from scratch. There's the choice of a B'nai Noach path of Judaism, but learning Tanakh and learning Torah, and learning about the mitzvot, and learning the traditions, and still very much attracted to the Orthodox world and the commitment that it takes to live an Orthodox lifestyle. I was very attracted to that.
Why?
I began learning that.
What was the attraction to it?
Because you could, everyday mundane things became beautiful when you learned what was behind it. One of my favorite books was the Jewish Book of Why, because I felt like I was why? Every time I saw a Jew do something, why do they do that? Why do they do that? And what is that? And that, you know, from the outside world looking in, when you think of some of the traditions and things that Jews do, it does look a little bizarre. And somebody who's not familiar with those are going to say, why are they doing that? What's that about? And I was obsessed with learning why Jews were doing that. And when you learned the purpose and the meaning behind each one of those little mundane things, they became beautiful, you know, washing the hands and knowing the tzitzit, what they represent, and putting a talit on in the morning, and, you know, the day-to-day things that you do, everything has meaning and purpose. And in my eyes, it was a way of every mitzvot that I did was a way of kissing Hashem and making him part of every activity that I did throughout the day.
So at that point, you decided to convert. That was the moment.
It took a little bit. I thought, you know, the Orthodox world is so foreign. I'm not so sure that they would, you know, that they would accept me in the Orthodox world. It does, you know, even though I'm attracted to it and fascinated by it, it felt like a world that I couldn't touch, like I didn't belong. I did try the conservative movement at first, but I was still completely focused on learning the text and learning Torah all the time, which wasn't a big focus in the conservative shul. It was more of a social environment. So me in wanting to discuss Torah or ask certain questions, I was sort of the oddball, and they were like, you know, go to somebody who like does that. I'm not like,
Yeah.
it was a social group, like a get together. I started going to Chabad lunch and learns, which was a story in itself. I went to a Chabad late after the Shabbos meal. I guess it was empty on Shabbos, and I walked into the Chabad house. It was just the rabbi and his wife, and said, I think I want to be a Jew. And he asked a little bit about me, and I said, well, I grew up a Christian, and I have been a missionary for the past several years, and I'm a preacher's kid. And that did not go over very well. He like was not comfortable with me being in the Chabad house.
Did you think you
Really.
were there to be a missionary at that point?
He
Why was
could
he
tell I
uncomfortable?
wasn't Jewish, and I was very much discussing my Christian upbringing, but I told him I was learning the differences between Judaism and Christianity, and I'm thinking I want to become a Jew. And you know, that whole thing of they reject you 3 times.
Mhm.
It was very true. He rejected me much more than 3 times. He
Really?
actually told me that first meeting, you can't be a Jew. We don't do that, which I guess it was honest, because Chabad doesn't do conversions.
Yeah.
But he said, you can't become a Jew any more than I can become a woman. Everybody has their place in this world, and you have your place and your purpose, and I have our place and our purpose. The Jews have a role to play, and the non-Jews have a role to play, and that's it. I did tell him that I believed I had Jewish roots in my mother's family, and that I had found that a grandmother and great grandmother were Jewish. But I was looking into that, and that suddenly triggered something
So,
in
Hans,
him.
so by definition, wouldn't you, if your grandmother and great grandma were, wouldn't that be your mother and you were also technically Jewish?
That's what turned him around, and that's what opened him up a little bit, and said, well, if that's the case, you can come. How about not for Shabbos and not for Shabbos meal, but we have a small get together every week. There's a lunch and learn. You can come and learn. It was learning the Parsha each week, and you can join for that. while you're discovering your genealogy. And then he says, let me know what goes on with looking into your genealogy. I did look into it. I found a great aunt that was in a Jewish cemetery, but then my grandmother was in a Catholic cemetery. And so it wasn't completely clear. It looked like maybe one of them converted out, and they said it, even if I did discover it, it was going to require a conversion anyway. So I stopped looking after a while, but it was many more than 3 times. And I kept coming back to the Parsha study every week and kept saying, could you tell me the path? Could you tell me how to pursue a conversion? And he kept saying no, until eventually he agreed to meet me at his home and presented me with some reading material on B'nai Noach and a righteous Gentile, how to, that they have a place and you should learn this. And I said, that's great, but that's not enough for me. I still want to convert. And he eventually set me up with the Beit Din and gave me that number. And I started the official conversion process.
Wow. So what was it that was that time point that you decided you didn't want to go down the route that he wanted you to go and didn't want to stay a Christian?
I knew I had left Christianity right after, when things started falling apart. When you reject Christianity, when you reject Jesus, you're no longer a Christian.
Yeah.
Of course, I went through all of that and started the conversion process without telling anybody in my family. My children knew because they were going to shul with me, right, and they were learning. They were very young, so
how young were you at that point? Like
my daughter was between 8 and 9, and my son was 4.
Wow. So they have a grasp over what was happening?
They did. They loved it. We started keeping Shabbos. I didn't live in a community, so the only way for us to keep Shabbos was to actually move into the Chabad house every week. We had mattresses that we would put down in the classroom, and we would sleep and stay in the Chabad house, which I think is probably the only way that I would have learned how to keep a kosher home.
Right.
Because connecting with the Rebbitzin and being there to help her prepare the meals, I didn't know how to cook. I was a single mom with a very limited budget, and it's actually, as a non-Jew, it's cheaper to eat out than it is to cook at home. I didn't know how to cook. We actually, you see restaurant signs of kids eat free places. So as a single mom, my kids eat free. I'm only paying for one meal. It's $5 or $6. And that was how we ate and managed our life. So becoming kosher and all of a sudden not having any food options, I had to learn to cook. And I don't think I could have done it without the Rebbitzin and learning, and then learning kosher and what you can and can't do. I don't know that I would have done that if I didn't have, somebody guiding and teaching me all of those things.
Are you still in touch with them at this point?
Somewhat on Facebook we are. I mean, I went through a very long conversion process. It was about 4 years that I was going through the conversion process. So moving in every week to the Chabad house, I got to know them very well. We became very close.
So how come it was for so long, the conversion process?
Because Beit Din is very careful. The conversion process in the Orthodox world is very serious. I happen to have been a single woman. I had 2 children, and there's a lot to consider with that. I wasn't wealthy. The tuition cost for Jewish day school was outrageous. And, the cost for my kids to go to school was my entire year's salary. There was no way that that was possible. And, the Jewish community isn't set up to finance scholarships for somebody who's not even Jewish.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult. I thought about homeschooling, but then the Beit Din there are requirements for the conversion process. You have to live in the community. Jewish communities are generally not the cheaper neighborhoods that a single mom can afford. I did find a place that I could move into the Jewish community, but that was a tremendous expense and a big change that I had to do. So it took time to do. And then children, they have to be in Jewish day school. Homeschooling is not okay, especially for a convert, because
There's only so much you can teach them at that point.
right. And the rabbi had said, there's no way for you to have a Jewish household and raise Jewish children if they don't have a Jewish day school education. If they're going to get a public school education and no Hebrews, no Judaics, you're not going to be successful in establishing a Jewish home. They need a Jewish education. So that was there was a lot of big hurdles. And then there's the fact that you're single. Naturally you're going to meet somebody. And what if you go through the conversion process and then that somebody is not Jewish, and then all of a sudden you end up leaving? Then the Beit Din has created a sinning Jew that's gone off and married a non-Jew. So that's a big potential for a problem. And then there's custody arrangements with children. America is very big with every parent has the right to teach religion to their children. And, I can't control the other environment. We did eventually work that out so that they were and they could, and that all worked out, and I did get to that point. But there's a lot to consider.
So at the point that you did convert, you stayed in America, or because I know you're living in Israel now, so what was the decision to move, or how long was it after you actually moved, after you converted?
Well, I think right away I became involved in the counter missionary world a little bit, because I was involved in so many of the missionary organizations that were operating in Israel. I did, and the rabbi of the organization that I had learned everything with happened to have been moving to Israel. So I ended up helping out by running the American office while they were establishing themselves in Israel, which meant I got to sort of live and work in the counter missionary world, which was great because I was so fascinated with and obsessed with that world, learning the differences between Judaism and Christianity and grappling with what I believed. I was able to focus, and I took the phone calls and sent out the materials, and every summer I would travel to Israel. There was the group was in Israel and working with Yeshiva. So I traveled to Israel quite a bit during that time. I loved Israel. I wanted to be there.
So you just decided that it was the place?
I did. It wasn't, at that time I was still single. I did eventually get through the conversion process a year after the conversion process.
You working with Rav Tovia Simcha at the time you were still converting?
Yes. He was establishing himself in Israel, and I was running the Houston office. I was running everything and sending his materials out from America.
Mm-hmm. So once you converted, you decided to continue on and move to Israel? Or how long was it in between them?
Once I converted, Rabbi Singer went off and did his thing in, I think he went to Indonesia after that.
Oh, wow.
I was working elsewhere. I started volunteering with an organization that was based in Israel, monitoring missionary activity, which was perfect for me because as a former missionary, I knew
What to look for at the point?
I knew what to look for, and the organizations that are partnering with Jewish organizations in Israel are not, they're not so open about their agenda. In fact, often they have an English website and a Hebrew website, and the Hebrew website is completely kosher. And what they say and present to the Jewish people in Israel and the organizations that they're partnering with isn't exactly honest. But in America, where they do their funding, and when they're amongst themselves, their mask comes off and they talk about their agenda openly. They have materials that they give to the supporters. They often brag about how they're converting Jews, how many are coming to Jesus. And that kind of information was vital to the organization in Israel that was monitoring these missionary groups that were working in Israel. So I would collect and get all of that information and send it to Israel. And they would present it to the leadership and say, this is the group that you're working with. This is, them fundraising, telling all about what they're really doing here.
So you said at the beginning that you don't try to tell like the missionaries that they're wrong. It seems like you're more saying we're protecting the Jewish communities to help them understand what the missionaries are doing. Is that correct?
Unmasking, exposing the agenda, and mostly deceptive. If you followed the work that I've done with B'nai Nu, it's really about the deceptive tactics. Jews for Jesus is very open. They're on the street corners, they're on the megaphones, they're handing out tracts. They don't disguise what they're doing, and they're straightforward. But the more deceptive tactics that I had learned as a missionary and with the Messianic movement, once I realized how deceptive that was, and I was appalled by it. It disgusted me. And then I would watch Jewish organizations working with them, or I would go to places and I would find people that I had grown up with in the Messianic movement, in the JCC or attending Jewish events, and say, wow, you guys don't realize what they are, why they're here. So then I started a little bit by little bit warning the Chabad rabbi, you don't understand the whole staff of volunteers that you have that's working at the JCC at these events. They're all Messianics. They're all missionaries. They specifically took that role as a greeter to volunteer in order to create relationships and meet Jews. So I right away felt like I need to warn the Jewish people because they don't know what they're dealing with. And
so do you ever speak to the missionaries themselves, or do you try not to do you ever try, for lack of a better term, enlighten the missionaries about what they're, as in that maybe what they're doing isn't the right thing, have you ever said to someone that Jesus isn't real, for example, to put it bluntly, have you ever had that kind of conversation?
It's very much a conflict for me because I know their world and I know where they're coming from. I do try to explain that the deceptive tactics are disrespectful. I know they don't see it that way, but it is. And I don't think they realize how offensive and evil what they're doing is to a Jew. So I do try to I do try to speak to them and say, deal honestly, respectfully, have integrity, and, treat it like you're coming into somebody else's home. If you know that that's offensive and it's not going to be accepted, don't push it, and don't find, deceitful ways to bring it about. Sort of like being a vegetarian. It would be terrible if somebody told you they're a vegetarian and you were trying to find ways to sneak pepperoni to them. That's not nice. That's terrible. It's offensive.
But to them, it's their core value. So how do they get around that?
To them, they feel like you just don't know better. To them, they see that you're in a burning building and you don't realize it. And they need to save you, and they need to get you out of that burning building, even if it's to pick you up and carry you. And, we'll talk about, why you're insane and wanting to stay in that environment later. But right now we need to get you out. And once I've saved you and rescued you, then you'll see, that you were
burning building,
that you were in that place.
Yeah.
But that's as somebody says that they see Jews as about to fall off a cliff, and it would be the worst thing. It would be, it would be the opposite of love to just let you fall. I have to try to save you.
So it really is. It's not coming from, like, as in, maybe it is dangerous, but it's not coming from a place of hatred or angst against each other. They're doing it because out of love, I guess. And like that's what you're saying is the most dangerous part about it.
And you don't know it because you're blind.
Yeah.
And the New Testament says that you're blind and you have blinders on your eyes, and there's a certain time that God is going to remove those blinders and you'll understand. And they're supposed to pray for that moment when you do understand, and they're supposed to be there and constantly planting a seed for when that is going to occur and be there.
Wow. Shannon, this was so interesting. Thank you so much for joining me. I really,
thank you.
I'm just like, it's such a foreign world, like, especially maybe it's more like normal in America, but growing up in the UK, we really didn't experience it as much. So to understand how much goes into it and stuff, it's so interesting. Wow.
Are you following, one of the journalists in the UK
Mm-hmm.
has been a big part of a lot of Benainu's investigations.
Who are they?
A lot of the Jewish Chronicle.
The Jewish, yeah.
The Jewish Chronicle has really been, we've
you uncover some of the hidden missionaries within Jewish communities. Was that your organization?
Yes.
Yeah.
The covert missionaries, each one that we've come across, which is it's not been so easy. People got very upset saying, why didn't you come out with this sooner? And I don't think people realize what we were up against. When you make these accusations, the institutions that are involved, people don't want their institution, their yeshiva, their whoever gave them smicha, whoever was involved in giving them any sort of authority, the rabbi of the community. Nobody wants to be known as having the missionary in their organization. And so everything's very, very hush hush, and this can't come out, and no, this can't be true. There was a lot of disbelief, and people just thought that it was too crazy. There's no way that this is true at all. I had taken the Elk case to so many journalists and said, this really needs to be public, and could you help me? Can we cover the story? I have an investigation. I have all of the materials. I just need somebody to help bring this out. And journalists didn't want anything to do with it.
Right.
We had a UK journalist who, as a favor, said, okay, I'll do a small bit on it and we'll see how it goes. But once I showed him the investigation, he says, wow, this is This is a major, major story. And then he really got into it, and the Jewish Chronicle invested in even more investigators, and sent investigators to in America to search out the family and even dig deeper into the story, and then helped release that. But nobody would cover it. I couldn't get the information out there. I couldn't get anybody
Why
to
were they so
listen.
scared? Just because of the, like, because of what? Because
I think it was
the
too
name?
hard to believe an Orthodox rabbi
Mhm. It's the
who's a
mission.
Kohen. He's a Sofer. He claims he's a direct descendant of the Baba Sali. He does Brit Milas. If he's not Jewish, if he's a missionary, this is like too wild. This is like a tremendous halachic ramifications. Is that lashon hora? Can we even say that? You know, this is huge. You can't just say something like that. It was really just too hard to believe until this journalist in the UK said, I'll do it, I'll take it on, and then got investigators and put the whole story together and really laid it out. And then there was several other cases. He had students. There was 10 other people who had made Aliyah and were living covertly in Jewish communities. So then one by one, we started to uncover more and more covert missionaries. And then the Jewish world suddenly realized this really is a problem. It's real.
Wow.
And the halachic ramifications of these cases and the positions that they take and the traditions, the rituals that they get themselves involved with. We had the last case was doing weddings and divorces. Divorces is huge. Those are tremendous halachic ramifications.
Yeah, if they get remarried, there's a big issue.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
Lead supervisor of the kashrut. I mean, that's tremendous.
How do they how do they get in these positions? Like how did no one understand, or did no one do any research before them? Like, I guess maybe we didn't
think about it. When somebody new comes to your community and they say, I'm about tshuva and I'm learning, nobody really asks their history. When somebody shows up in shul and they're a Jew, you count them for a minyan. You don't.
Yeah.
You don't ask for their documents. You don't ask for their parents' ketubah. But you know it, and especially if they're about tshuva, it makes sense that they don't have a family connection. It makes sense that they come from a different background and they talk different and they don't know so much. So they manage like that. But along the way, their goal is to accumulate documentation to prove their Jewish identity. So like the last case showed up in a community, said we're about tshuva, we're learning. We actually had a secular wedding. We grew up sort of traditional, but we didn't have kedusha, we didn't have a chuppah. Can you help us with that? We want to correct that. And the rabbi said, sure. He says, didn't even ask for documentation because he was of the belief that if somebody says they're Jewish, you're supposed to take them at their word. You're not supposed to question them. So he gave them a chuppah, which ended up giving them a kosher ketubah, which became a huge document to establish Jewish identity, especially for their children. If one of the documents you submit for Aliyah is your parents' ketubah, so that's a huge document.
So these were ground roots that they laid. They were planning very well in advance. Wow.
Right. Another one in Seattle. He went into the shul. He was visiting, and in the Messianic movement, there's a huge movement in the Messianic world to learn Hebrew, learn how to daven, Even they learn Gemara.
Really?
So a man went to the shul, came in as a visitor, said him about tshuva, started learning daf yomi every day. And he did it for 6 months. And when somebody's sitting there learning daf yomi with you for 6 months and they say they're about tshuva, and then they ask you for a letter saying, you know what, I'm about tshuva, my family's like really upset with it, I don't know that I can get anything. Could you give me a letter for Aliyah? A rabbi can vouch for you and say that you're Jewish, and then give you a recommendation for Aliyah. They can say that you're Jewish so that you can get married. But this person wasn't Jewish at all. And this kind-hearted rabbi, really wanting to help a Jew out, decided, of course he's Jewish, and gave the letter. And it's they're grossly taking advantage of the kindness of kiruv rabbis that really want to genuinely help another Jew, which is going to have to change. They're going to have to be a little more careful about it and realize and understand that sometimes it's not completely kosher. And sometimes these people who come in with absolutely no background out of nowhere
look into
are
yeah
problematic, and we do need to verify.
That's just wild, like genuinely wild. Like you,
It is.
like I guess the Jewish community we're in, you assume that like if someone's coming to you, you help them. You don't really question. And so
You do. We're that way by nature. We're the Jewish people are family. You can, as a Jew, you can go anywhere around the world, and you know that if you end up stuck in an airport, you can call and you're hosted and you have meals. And if you need to borrow clothes, you have family all over the world, because we are a very close-knit community. And unfortunately, that can be taken advantage of, and it is being taken advantage of by people who don't have such a kosher agenda.
wow. Okay, Shannon, this was incredible. I'm going to leave the links to everything down below. Everyone should read up, watch all the videos, because it's just, I guess that's the only way to combat it, really, that you just got to understand it. You got to see it.
You have to know what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And you have to educate yourself. I don't know, do you learn Tanakh in Yeshiva?
I started to. Okay. I actually just started to. I just did my second round of the Chumash. So that's like, and hopefully I'm going to start in a couple of weeks going through Tanakh. But you're like, I agree, it's not the normal thing to go through Tanakh. So if someone quotes you something, you just assume that what you're saying is the correct thing.
Right, because that's not the focus in Yeshiva. I wish it was, and I would like it to be, because when you come in contact with a missionary who is telling you scriptures, verses from Navi and stories from the Navi,
there's nothing to combat it with, because we don't know.
You don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And then you have youth who, you're struggling for your identity. You're trying to figure out who you are. You often are sort of rebellious. You're like wanting to know what the real world is like, and you maybe you don't have complete trust in your Rebbe, or you're turned off by this or that. And a missionary comes in and says, your rabbi's hiding this from you. Your rabbi doesn't want you to look at this. This is why you don't learn Navi in school. If you learn Navi, you're going to discover Jesus, and they know that, which is exactly why they don't teach it. And that resonates really, for a lot of youth who feel like, they feel a lot of conflict and vulnerable, and it plays into it. But it's not true. And sometimes people will go to their Rebbe and say, I have this thing I want to ask you about. And you start telling your rabbi what a missionary told you. And sometimes rabbis don't sit and work it through with you or answer. Some people, some rabbis will say, why are you looking at that? This is crazy. Get out, and they won't answer you. And that's probably the worst thing, because then in that person's mind, it's, whoa, maybe that missionary was right. My rabbi is hiding something from me. It's
very psychological the way they're doing it.
It's very psychological, and it's very deceptive. And it works for vulnerable people. So learning and knowing what you believe, knowing Judaism, knowing the Navi, and being able to answer these. You don't have to learn Christianity. You don't have to learn all the responses to Christian missionaries. But if you know your own Bible, if you know Tanakh, then you won't fall prey to these groups.
Amazing. Shannon, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hopefully we can help people who are in these positions, and please check out all the links. I'm going to leave everything below. And yeah, this was truly incredible and just so educational. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.